So this happened about 10 years ago when I was a freshman in college. I had just recently started dating my boyfriend as well. He lived a few towns away from me at that time. We actually now live in a cute apartment not far from where this story takes place. I was taking some of the back roads toward the parkway to get home. I had fallen asleep at his house while watching a movie, so it was around 3 a.m. and I was really exhausted. I knew the way to the parkway well enough, but I was still not that familiar with that particular part of town. As you get closer to the parkway, you have to actually cut through a park to get to the entrance ramp. That being said, there were very few lights around this area. The nearest house wasn't very far away, but it was completely out of sight. I pulled onto the short road and saw a golden sedan stopped right in the middle of the road. It was actually stopped in such a way that it didn't really matter which way you were traveling, it was going to be a squeeze to get around him. Just for a little bit of background, I'm a very small person. At the time, I might have weighed 100 pounds total, and I was only 5 feet tall. I slowed my car down and was trying to see if I could see any headlights coming from the other direction. I wanted to make a move to pull around him. Before I could do anything though, this tall man ran around from the front of this stopped car and started waving his arms to get my attention. As I mentioned, I was small, young, alone, and it was 3 a.m. There was no way I was going to stop for this guy. Even considering all that, this man didn't look particularly worried. He didn't look scary or anything, but an alarm went off in my head that something was not quite right about this situation. I tried to inch up slowly so I could pass him by, but he stood in front of my car and would not let me pass. I quickly locked all my car doors and stopped completely to not run him over. He started trying to talk to me through the window. He was now making his way over to my car. My hearing is not very good. He was so close to me though that I could actually read his lips. He was asking me for help or something. He wanted to take my cell phone to call someone. I said that I was very sorry, but I couldn't do that. He put his hand against my window and pleaded, "Please, please." I said no again, and I didn't care if I ran his foot over. I just left. I was starting to get real scared. I was just barely able to pass by this blockade, but to do so, I had to go into the oncoming traffic lane. I looked in my mirror. The man was now standing in the middle of the road, staring at me. I could see the anger on his face in my brake lights. I pulled back into the right lane, and as I did, my headlights caught 3 men climbing out of the bushes. They were all dressed in the same black t-shirts and jeans, and they were all glaring furiously at me. I could almost feel their anger radiating off of them. I gunned it and flew up that road and onto the parkway. I could feel my entire body shaking. What had just happened here? What were they going to do if I had really stopped? I pulled out my phone and called the police immediately. They had to transfer me a few times because no one could quite figure out who I should be talking to, the county police or the highway patrol. It was basically at the parkway entrance, and no one wanted to deal with me. When I was finally able to tell someone what happened, they sent a car over to check it out. I asked the officer to call me back and let me know if they found them, since I drive over that area a lot. He later told me that by the time they got there, the men and the car were gone, but not even 5 minutes later, another woman called in. Exact same story as me in the exact same location as well. I was advised to not drive over by that park at night anymore. I really had no idea it was not safe at the time, and I've never taken that exit at night since. When I told my parents, my mom cried and my dad was crazy angry, but they were both proud of me for not stopping. There was also a new rule instituted into our family, my boyfriend included, that we had to text someone when we were on our way home just in case. I was 18 years old and on my way home to California on a summer break after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me and stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after dinner with friends and planned on driving all the way through the night. I was making good time, and I was around 3 or so hours away from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I was just an hour outside of Reno and on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. Very suddenly, I got the urge to pee. I guess it was all those energy drinks I'd chugged earlier coming back to haunt me. I kicked myself in the ass for not stopping when I had gassed up 45 minutes before. I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up and drove the few miles to the sign, then pulled in. Parked in the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, a Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and hurriedly jogged to the restroom before I peed myself. I was flushing when I heard someone enter, and I froze. I'm in decent physical shape, and I work out quite often. For a guy though, I'm on the smaller side, only 5'7" and about 160 pounds. I'm bracing myself for some real Michael Myers type shit when I open the door, only to see an average Joe looking guy. He looked up and gave me a friendly smile, then stepped over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he started talking. His voice was gravelly and low, so I couldn't quite hear him the first time. "You like dogs, man?" he asked as he washed his hands. He was wearing those coveralls mechanics would wear, and he had grease stains all over it. My creeper meter started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said as I left the bathroom, "Yeah, man, dogs are cool." Well, apparently that was the wrong thing to say. He came out following me through the door, very much on my heels. "I got a new puppy. You want to see him? He's real cute." Now I was freaking out. My keys were in one hand and my cell phone was in the other. I called back to him in a shaky voice. "No thanks, I gotta get going now." I was getting into my car when he grabbed the door trying to pull it open. This dude was hella small, even though he was a good few inches smaller than me. I started up the car and put my phone to my ear. What he said next caused me to almost crap my pants. "By the time the cops get here, you'll already be dead." With that, I kicked out at his stomach. Thank goodness it connected firmly. He let go of my door and fell back onto his ass. I then pulled the door closed and locked it, and screeched the fuck out of that rest stop. I saw him scramble to his car as well, but I didn't stay around to watch. I took off like a bat straight out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking that man was going to follow me home and finish me off. When I got home, I told my dad, who had stayed up to wait for me, what happened. He talked me out of calling the authorities. I made sure to take an entirely different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop ever again. This happened back when I was 17 and living in a small rural village. I'd been at a friend's all evening, watching films and chilling. I left to go home at around 11 p.m. It was quite a long walk back to my house, as she lived on the very outskirts of the village down some back roads. I felt relatively safe though, as when it got to a certain time of night, it was always very quiet. You would never bump into anybody, and there would hardly ever be any cars on the roads, especially at that late hour. It was actually very weirdly peaceful. Where I lived was a large avenue with 2 big blocks of houses, like 2 big circles that you would get to after following a small dark road that consisted of a few large old houses and a vicarage. As I was passing by, I saw this beat-up little red Nissan Micra coming towards me. The closer it got, the more it slowed down. The guy was clearly breaking his neck trying to look at me. There was absolutely nothing subtle about this. It nearly came to a full stop as it drew alongside me, and I began to panic. There was not a single other soul about, just me and this strange guy. I was determined, though, not to get myself in a tizzy, so I picked up the pace and refused to look at him. As far as I know, he just drove off without even attempting anything further. I continued to walk home at this point, literally a 5-minute straight line from there. I kept on listening out for a car engine or any noises to indicate he might be following me. I was also vigilant of any headlights creeping up behind me. I heard nothing though and saw nothing either. I breathed a big sigh of relief as I could now see my house within view. I walked in and locked up the door. I saw my mom stood in the living room chatting with someone on the phone. I was trying to interrupt her conversation to tell her about that weird guy in the red car, when for some reason she went out to the front window and peeked through the curtain. She took the phone away from her ear and said, "What's that car?" This was all a minute since walking through the door. I was thinking to myself, it can't be him, because if he had followed me, I would have heard his car. Before I even got the chance to look for myself though, there was a knock at the front door. As I go to answer it, only pulling it open a few inches, there is that guy, stood there empty-handed, wearing a baseball cap. It was the very same guy from that car. I have no idea how he followed me without me noticing. Can I help you?"
"Yeah, did you order a pizza?" he asked me.
No, I think you have the wrong house." He took a step toward me and said again in a not fucking around kind of tone,
"No, I said, did you order a pizza?"
Before I replied, my mom came up behind me, opened the door fully, and said, "Is there a problem here?" This caused the man to back up and mumble. I guess he was not expecting anyone else to be home.
"Oh, I'm sorry, I must have had the wrong address."
He took off and hopped in his car, speeding off into the night. Safe to say, we were both a bit spooked after this, and made sure every part of the property was locked up properly. I'm going to start this by saying that this was a widely publicized case, so a few details have been changed for privacy. The main portion is accurate though. A few years ago, I worked at a popular hookah lounge in my town. We had many regulars, so of course I got to know many people, and even made some lasting friendships with a few. Amongst those regulars was a group of people I was not terribly fond of. All of them except this one girl named Rachel. Rachel was a very kind girl who I enjoyed talking to a lot. I didn't approve of the people she hung out with or the decisions she made though. Even so, it was her life, so what place did I have to say anything about it? Eventually, Rachel started dating another regular named Ben, who was a part of my friend group. This is when we got a lot closer, and she started to trust me and confide in me more about things in her life. Eventually, Rachel and Ben broke up, and it really devastated her. I clearly remember her messaging me to hang out, and her crying on my shoulder for a half an hour. During their relationship, Rachel had stopped hanging around those shady people as much, but of course afterwards she went right back to them and started partying a lot and doing who knows what. She stopped talking to me as much as well, and eventually started dating some other guy in that shady group named Greg. Of course, that relationship went south as well, due to reasons unbeknownst to me. Rachel even ended up filling in a restraining order against Greg. A few days later, Rachel went missing, and she was never heard from again. It was awful. Her family started showing up all the time to talk to me, asking if I had seen her. I hadn't, but apparently someone had told them she was last seen downtown somewhere. It really broke my heart. One day, during a busy shift, someone we both talked to sometimes showed up and talked to me about Rachel's disappearance. I'll say his name is POS. POS told me he'd heard all about her being seen somewhere and wanted to know what I knew about it. He asked me if I'd heard anything bad that happened to her. I'm assuming he thought since I worked at a regular hangout spot of hers, I'd have heard something. I told him I didn't know anything though, and we hugged before he walked off to talk to other people about trying to find her. Months passed by before I heard anything else about Rachel. Her family showed up occasionally from time to time asking about her, but nothing had really changed in all that time. Around a year after her initial disappearance though, the police had a big breakthrough in her case, and her body was found. After some investigating, the police discovered that Greg had hired POS to kill Rachel, and he did. He killed her and threw her body away like trash, and continued on with life as usual. The fact that I spoke to POS after the fact, and even hugged him, weighs on my conscience. It's been years, and I'm still so upset about it. He's in prison now, and I'll likely never see him again, but it really hurts. I spoke to her family about her, about having hugged the man who killed her. I wish I had been a better friend to her. I still think maybe I could have saved her if I had done more. I could have insisted she not hang out with those kinds of people. I don't blame myself for her murder, but I think, or maybe wish, I could have done something else. Had I been more insistent, maybe she'd still be here. I don't know. All I do know is that if for whatever reason I ever see that guy again, I won't let him off the hook. He knew she was dead, and he still treated me like a friend and asked if I'd heard or seen anything about her. What a piece of shit. I hope you suffer. I'm a girl and was looking for a no-strings-attached date of sorts with another girl around the time this happened. I just wanted the comfort, I guess. Who knows? I went on Plenty of Fish, the dating site, and let everyone know I was on the market. I matched with only 3 people in all that time. One was a bit nuts right away, so I said no. The other didn't even respond to my message saying hello. The third one was a little bit loopy and overenthusiastic, but we somehow happened to have a lot in common. I'm an exchange student from America, living in the UK, so genuinely I think the Brits are all a little bit crazy anyway. After exchanging a half dozen or so texts per night for the whole week, she insisted on meeting up. We met at my local bar nearby where I stay. She was a bit on the tubby side, but I didn't really mind. She also had long, dark hair, down to her hips. I'd have killed to have hair as long as this. She was very gothic in appearance, dark clothes, black and purple nails. We got to talking straight away, and somehow started sharing our kinks. She was very straight to the point, and very forward with me. She was in no hurry to get to know me. She even insisted I go over to her place right away. Well, I told her to calm her jets and allow me to at least know a little bit about her first. As much as I wanted some comfort, this was going way too fast. It was then that she made a weird confession to me. She started to tell me about her bondage adventures and how much she loved to punish men. She told me she enjoyed torturing them for fun. I started to laugh this off, but the wickedness in her eyes made me think maybe she was telling me the truth. She saw that I didn't really believe her or take her seriously at first, so she started to go to real extremes with her stories. Then she whipped out her phone. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. She had several photos of men wrapped up in cellophane. I still had my doubts any of this was real until she showed me an actual video of a guy fully mummied in cellophane rolling around on a bed trying to escape. His muffled screams still haunt me to this day. I asked her why she'd do this. She told me because it was fun, letting out a high-pitched squeal as she laughed under her breath. What happened next shocked me the most, though. I asked her what happened to the guy after. She told me, "I don't know, I just left him like that, who knows? You would have needed a forklift to lift my jaw at this moment." She told me she'd done this to tons of men, and there was a high chance most of them didn't survive. One day, I think you'll be watching the news about the cling film killer, she said. After all of this, she still insisted we head back to her place for some fun, which of course I refused. I waited till she went to the restroom, and I made a run for it. I'd never felt so scared of someone in my entire life. I had missed a few calls from her in that time. It sent chills down my spine. I was too scared to answer this fucking lunatic. I reported her to the police immediately, but I was told I did not have enough evidence of this. Also, her cell number had been mysteriously cut off, and her Plenty of Fish profile had been deleted as well when I went to check. It still sends chills up and down my spine that such a crazy girl would casually confess to such a thing. I'm hoping it's all some sort of sick prank, but I can't unsee what I saw that day. This was November 2016 in Glasgow, Scotland. I was desperate at the time, I must admit. I'd been single and alone for quite some time, and it was really driving me crazy. That's when I met Laura. She came across as a very sweet girl and all, but she was in a real hurry to meet me. So I did. She insisted we go to the pub, no fancy dates necessary to her, but I didn't really mind this. At first glance, I knew I'd been swindled. She looked very different from what I'd seen before. I didn't really mind though. I was just happy to have a date at all. I didn't exactly think I was very good looking myself, so I decided to give her a chance to redeem herself. We got to talking, and after a few beers, things started to get more intimate. Before I go any further, she was quite an overweight girl with long dark hair, and she had eyeshadow similar to Amy Winehouse. She told me she was a huge fan actually. I'd asked about her hobbies and interests and all that normal first date stuff, but she kinda rebuked me and instead asked me to talk more about myself instead. I told her about my job and she yawned sarcastically. "Let's talk about your sex life," she said. She slipped her foot out of her shoe and started rubbing my crotch with her bare foot. Needless to say, I was very aroused. Yeah, I didn't have much to say in that department. It had been a while since I'd had sex, so I was very honest with her. I asked about hers. She said she had a lot of kinks and that she'd done things that I'd never imagined. "Wanna see what I can do?" she said. "Let's go to my place." At this point, I was starting to feel very drunk. I was amazed, as it was only on my 4th pint or so. I did have 2 shots though, so I put it down to this. We waited for a taxi. She was holding my hand excitedly, whispering into my ear that she was going to do some things to me that I'd never experienced before, and probably never would again. In a way though, I actually couldn't wait to just fall asleep. My head kept feeling heavier than the rest of my body, like the ground was moving underneath my feet. The rest was a blur. I can't even remember getting into the taxi. I do remember though falling down the stairs at one point as she was standing above me laughing at me. "Come on," she said. "Get your sexy ass up here." I struggled up the stairs, and before I knew it, from what I remember, I was in her bedroom naked. It was like I just blacked out. I tried to sit up, only to find myself tied to the bed by my arms and legs. She entered the room dressed in bondage gear. I was deeply aroused but very confused at the same time. She performed some sex acts on me before going all the way. I laid there delighted, don't get me wrong, but something felt very off about this all. I had dozed off for quite a bit. I'd been awoken by a weird screeching sound. "What are you doing?" I said, as she was wrapping my legs with cling film. "Hush now, this is the best bit." I was no longer tied to the bed, but I felt very numb all of a sudden and couldn't move my arms or legs. She kept wrapping me up from my legs upwards. I was screaming at her to stop. Because of this, she placed cling film in my mouth and told me to shut the fuck up. I was struggling to breathe at this point. I tried my best to dislodge that ball of cling film from my mouth. Eventually, I was totally wrapped up from head to toe. I could barely even see anything outside. She told me this was my punishment for being terrible in bed. That she had so many other victims just like me, all wrapped up waiting to die. She left the room and I screamed and screamed. I felt myself slowly fading away into unconsciousness. I woke up on what was now the next day, suddenly able to breathe. This time, there were plenty of people looking at me. They had removed most of the cling film and resuscitated me as well. I wasn't aware of anything until they told me. It turned out I wasn't actually in Laura's flat, but an old abandoned hotel. The police were all over me, asking me questions about what happened. I attempted to show them her Tinder profile, but she had long since deleted the page. I'm grateful to my rescuers that saved me, but I'm forever traumatized by this incident, and I end up with panic attacks when I see people that even look remotely similar to her. It took me a few years to finally trust people enough to go on dates again, and I'm still on the road to recovery mentally. I'm glad that I'm still alive, but I'm wondering if she's still out there, and if there are others like me that did not make it. This happened last night around 7:30 p.m., so it was already dark outside. My friend and I, both 22 and female, were about 2/3 of the way through our 16-hour drive back home from Salem, Massachusetts. I really needed to pee, so we stopped at a rest area in eastern Pennsylvania. I usually avoid rest areas like the plague, but this one looked nice enough, and I didn't really get any bad feelings from it. When we walked in, the only other person inside was this older man, probably mid to late 60s, standing by the vending machines talking on his phone. We walked past him across the room and into the bathroom. We were there for a good 10 to 15 minutes because she apparently wanted to pop a couple of pimples as well. When we were finished, we walked back out laughing at something one of us had said. That man was still standing there, but he was not on the phone anymore. Instead, he smiled and stared at us the entire time it took us to get to the exit of the rest area. We started running back to my car, which was about 6 parking spaces from the door, still laughing but also a little bit freaked out by this guy. We were about to hop in when I remembered my boyfriend wanted us to check my oil on the way home, since it was such a long drive. My car had been having some slight issues at the time. I considered waiting until the next time we needed to stop for gas, but I decided to just get it over with now instead. As I was checking the oil, the man from before, along with a slightly younger man we hadn't seen, left the rest area and both began walking toward us. The younger one was coming ahead on the sidewalk, the old one kind of diagonally going the opposite side to the driver's side of our car. This was odd because there was no other cars past mine. The only cars I could see were on the other side of the lot, closer to the building. My friend and I looked at each other and bolted for the car doors. I realized I was still holding the dipstick, so I cursed. We had to run back over and lift the hood back up. We hurried into the car and locked the doors just as they were approaching. We watched as the younger man slowly walked past the car, staring in at us with his completely blank face. He continued walking down the sidewalk for a while, before pausing for a second and turning around to come back towards us. The man, still just smiling, came within a few feet of the other door, then turned and walked past us to the other side of the parking lot. I backed out, and once I straightened the car and started pulling forward to leave the rest area, we saw the man had moved to the middle of the road and was standing there with that unnerving smile. Now he was motioning for us to stop. I drove right past him because no way was I gonna fucking do that. We watched in the mirrors as both men hopped into cars on the other side of the parking lot, closer to the building. We spent the next couple of hours shaken up and blabbing about what could have happened. I'm not really sure what their intentions were, but there can't have been any good reason for them to approach us like that at that rest area. I tried telling myself maybe they were gonna ask if we needed help with car troubles or something, but I was very clearly just checking the oil. It doesn't make sense why the younger man would walk the complete opposite direction from his car and go so far down the sidewalk. I'm not really sure what to make of it. "25-year-old male here. I got home last night, which in my apartment complex means all the good parking spots are already taken. I parked a good distance away from my apartment and began to walk over towards it. There was a thunderstorm out that night. It was not raining yet, so the air had energy and smelled real great as well. I decided to take my time and make a loop around my building, then come up behind it. As I made the corner and began walking back down towards my apartment, I saw a guy coming out of the parking lot right from between 2 cars. We nodded to each other and I slowed my pace. He began walking ahead of me, but I also noticed that he had slowed down his pace to match mine now. I started to go even slower because of this, intending to cut the corner as soon as we approach it and enter my apartment as soon as possible, the front door just being right on the corner. He seemed reluctant to walk too far ahead of me, so immediately I was on alert. He approached the corner first. I come around. He's at my apartment door, shaking my doorknob. He looks at me as I round the corner and says, "Damn, lost my keys." The realization that he was lying and the implication of that lie slammed every one of my systems into high alert. Everything in me told me not to stop there, so I kept on walking and gave him a sympathetic smile. He turned and stared at me, then asked if I had a phone he could borrow. At this point, I'm feeling stuck and panicking, not sure what to do. This man is now pretending he lives in my apartment, so it's not like I can get past him to get in. My car was too far away, and in the dark, any sudden movements would alert him I was now onto him. I explained to him that my phone had died, which immediately caused my heart to skip a beat. Now he must think I can't call the police. I walked one door over and started knocking on the door. It was past midnight around this time. The man was just standing at my doorstep, staring at me. After what felt like an eternity, my neighbor, who I'm on a "hey, how are ya" and "nice night out" speaking terms with, opened the door. I immediately say, "Hey, Kevin," and pushed past him into his apartment. I immediately turned and closed the door to lock it. I explained to him what was happening. He went to grab his gun while I called the cops. The guy was now long gone, though. Now I'll never be able to walk around my apartment complex without constantly looking over my shoulder.
I had finally done it. After talking to Jasmine for a few months in school and over the phone, I finally built up the courage to ask her if she wanted to go to the mall and maybe see a movie. I don't think I've been happier than when she said yes. I mean, you remember what it's like when you're 13 and you're about to go on a date for the first time. It's an awesome but anxiety-induced feeling. So on the days leading up to the weekend, we were talking about what movie we might see and what stores we wanted to walk through. We didn't have much money, but it was more about hanging out while we weren't in school. Then the weekend came. It was Friday night, and we had been snapping each other back and forth when I noticed something odd. You see, Jasmine had been sitting on her couch, which was right in front of her living room window, and in one of the pictures she sent me with one of those funny filters on it, I could have sworn that I saw something behind her that was blurry, as if it had been moving past the window. But before I could tell her anything, she sent me another snap. My jaw dropped, and I didn't know quite how to react. This time, what I saw behind her was clear as day to me. You wouldn't have noticed it if you weren't focusing on the window, but because I had already been curious about it, I was paying really close attention. I could clearly make out the silhouette of a tall figure behind her. It appeared to be wearing dark clothes, and I couldn't make out any details. Before the picture disappeared forever, I quickly screenshotted it. I swiped the screen and began to type out a message, asking her what was behind her in the window. But before I could finish the message, she sent me one. "Did you just save that picture?" So I quickly finished typing my response to her. It read, "Yeah, sorry, take a look at it again. There's something in the window behind you." I saw that she was typing back in response. Then all of a sudden the typing symbol disappeared. I messaged her a few more times, but when there was no response, I called my mom into the room. I showed her the picture, and she let out an audible gasp. Without hesitating, she pulled her phone out and called the cops to let them know that there appeared to be a grown man spying on a young girl. We gave them the address, and then we did everything we could to get a hold of Jasmine's parents, who had been working at the time. We never saw or heard from Jasmine again. When the police finally made it to her house, they found signs of foul play, along with her cell phone. The screen had been badly broken, as if someone had thrown it. Notices went out to be on the lookout, and a zoomed-in picture of the silhouette was shared around the local papers. No one came forward. That was only a few years ago, and sometimes I wake up hoping that it was all some sort of a weird, overdrawn prank. I couldn't imagine what Jasmine's family was going through. After my mother and father split up, it took a long time before my mom was ready to start dating again, but I remember how happy she was when she finally felt ready. she was definitely confused about how the whole dating world worked nowadays, with all the apps and social media. I, of course, wanted her to stay away from Tinder. I mean, it was my mom. I didn't like the idea of her dating, but I definitely wanted her to find someone who she could be happy with. So I told her to stick with talking to people she knows, or maybe someone from work, and I ended up showing her Snapchat, which she had heard her friends talk about. So we set it up on her iPhone, and she immediately began taking selfies that were way too close to her face. But she ultimately seemed to have everything under control, so I began minding my own business. As the days went on, she said that she was having so much fun sending pictures to her coworkers. All in all, she seemed to be enjoying herself. That was until one day, she came in and I could tell that she was upset by something. And when I asked her what was wrong, she told me about a guy from work that used to be really creepy toward her shortly after her and my dad divorced. And she said that somehow he found out that she was on Snapchat. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just told her that she could block him if she wanted, but she said that she didn't want to cause any problems for herself at work, and instead was going to ignore anything he sends her and just act like he doesn't exist, which sounded like a solid plan to me. But I told her to let me know if anything happened, and after all, we didn't really talk about it much. Then about 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my room playing some Borderlands 2 on my 360, and I happened to look out the window, which faces the street. I noticed that there was a car parked along the curb across the street from my house. It was rainy out that day, so I couldn't really tell if the car was empty or not. Despite it being midday, I just figured that it was someone visiting the neighbors or something, and I got back to playing my game. What triggered something in my head that there was something weird going on was the fact that I noticed 2 separate occasions where I saw the car's headlight turn on for a few moments and then back off. After a few hours passed, and I saw that the car hadn't moved, and I was pretty sure someone was sitting inside. She came into my room and looked out my window, and she didn't say anything. She told me not to worry about it, and that it was probably something for my neighbor. It turns out that she was just trying to keep me from getting nervous. About 20 minutes later, I saw the police pull up behind the car. That was when my mom let me know that the car belonged to her coworker, the creepy guy that wouldn't leave her alone. The officer suspected that he used the Snapchat map feature to find out where my mom was. When they searched his car, they found what they refer to as a kill kit in his trunk. There were zip ties, plastic wrap, and large trash bags. Needless to say, my mom deleted Snapchat that night, and we pressed charges against the guy. As far as I know, he is still behind bars. Have you ever had someone randomly add you on Snapchat? Well, maybe after you hear what happened to me, you might not accept the request next time. You see, while I was in college, I got a random request and I accepted it. I just assumed it was a classmate, and I would find out who it was when they messaged me or snapped me. It wasn't long before I started getting some really weird messages. No pictures. They only used the chat feature at first. They would send me things like, "I'll see you after statistics class," or "How was your lunch?" Only they would know exactly what I ate. It was clear that someone knew my schedule and was watching me, but I honestly just figured it was one of my friends playing some weird prank on me. I didn't pay it any mind, and often responded with a joke answer or something. But one day, that wasn't going particularly well for me. I was a bit cranky, and when I got a message from the person, I basically told them either to tell me who they are or leave me alone. Immediately, they became aggressive, asking me who I think I am and saying that they are always watching me. So that weekend, I decided to go home and spend some time with my family and old friends to unwind. I told them about everything that was happening, and they agreed that it was probably one of my friends being a jerk. But that night, when I was sitting in my room, I received a message from them saying, "Come out." I was confused, so I chose not to answer. About 2 minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. I froze with fear. I was so worried it was the person who was threatening me. But how would they have followed me home from school? I had my Snap Map location turned off. My father ended up answering the door, and apparently, no one was there. Right after he closed the door, I received my first picture from the person who was threatening me. I was afraid to open, but eventually I did. It was a picture taken of my dad at the door looking around for whoever knocked. They were right outside my house, messing with me. Me and my family agreed that it would be safer for us to notify the cops, so we called 911. When they showed up, they couldn't find anyone, but told us to call them if anything else happened. I immediately blocked their Snapchat and admittedly didn't sleep that night. For the next few weeks, everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. I ended up transferring to a different college between semesters, and I didn't move out of my parents' home until earlier this year. Not because I couldn't financially, but because I didn't want to be living alone and have those people start harassing me again somehow. Now, I have a small house of my own and a big St. Bernard who is not only my best friend but my guardian in case someone should ever try to hurt me or my family.